So, Asha, can Pete Hegseth order the military to go to war in our cities?
It's complicated.
I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
And I'm Asha Rangappa. I teach national security law at Yale University. I'm a former FBI special agent, and I'm the author of the Freedom Academy Substack.
And hi, I'm Mark Hertling. I'm a retired lieutenant general in the U.S. Army, and I'm their esteemed guest today.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down into a soundbite or a skeet. Well, General Hertling, thank you so much for joining us. It's a real honor to have you with us today.
No, it's a pleasure to be with both of you. I really enjoy the things you do, and it's fun to be with you to talk about some very difficult, complicated things.
Yeah, I feel like, we love having, we don't bring on guests very often. And I love it when we do, because I think we bring on people who know a lot about the topics, but it's usually because something crazy has happened.
So that's
like this week,
yeah.
Which was complete crazy cakes. So, I saw you on TV, General, talking about this meeting and how unusual it was just on its face, just this idea that you're going to bring in these 800, flag officers, generals. And there was a lot of speculation about some of the things that could go down. Like, is this a loyalty oath? Is this a big purge? I mean, best case scenario, it seemed like this is some major secure briefing that only can be done in person or something. Even though I know that we clearly have technology where that could happen remotely.
Yeah.
And it wasn't any of those things. What was your initial reaction? I just need to know.
Well, I'll just follow on with what you just said, Asha, because, there were all kinds of menu items you could choose from. Are they going to talk national security strategy? Are they going to talk about rebalancing the force? Are they going to talk about reduction of the general officer corps? All these things had been rumored before this all started. And it turned out, and right before then, they even said it was going to be a classified up to the level of secret briefing. So you say, okay, well, then something dynamic is going to be going on here. But what this really turned out to be is an adaptability exercise for all the generals, the admirals, and their senior enlisted advisors. So each one of those generals and admirals, by the way, and this is an important point, which I'll go into later, had their senior enlisted person with them, whether it was a command sergeant major or a chief master sergeant in the Air Force or a chief petty officer in the Navy. And I'm probably not getting those terms right because I don't know the Navy and the Air Force rank structure as I should. But they were all going to be with their general or admiral. So this is a pretty big deal. This almost never happened. Well, no, I'll restate that and say this has never happened before, especially with this number. What it turned into was basically a public ass-chewing contest from Secretary Hegseth. And there is a mantra in the Army for leadership that says you praise publicly and you counsel privately. Well, this was just the opposite of that. This was a counseling, an open forum counseling of all the senior leaders from 1-star to 4-star and their senior enlisted NCOs, non-commissioned officers, in a room with a television camera that was broadcasting it not only to the United States, but to the world. And truthfully, I received a whole lot of text messages and emails, not only from some of the people in that room, because a lot of those men and women were junior officers when I was retiring. So I know a lot of them, and I mentored a few of them. But I was also getting messages from around the world, from former colleagues in Europe, heads of armies in many of the nations in Europe saying what's going on. So this was not just a counseling session, if you will, from the Secretary of Defense telling what his expected standards are and how he didn't feel the military forces were meeting them. But this was a public power play. And that's what made it really unfortunate And then later on during the planning cycle, and I don't know if this was part of the plan from the beginning, but it seemed to be an add-on. Oh yeah, by the way, the commander-in-chief's going to come over and talk too. And that turned into a very meandering speech. That's not the way these kind of sessions go. So if I were to put myself back in my role as the commander of U.S. Army Europe as a lieutenant general when I retired 13 years ago, if I had to have gone to this meeting, I would have first of all been figuring out, okay, what's this all about and how do I prepare better for it? Just like a lawyer does when they go in the courtroom. But then afterwards, I had to take the notes back, which all of us carry around, these little notebooks, these little moleskins that you can write what happened and take it back to your troops and your subordinates. And I would have had to explain to my subordinates what occurred and what changes we would have to consider making. And that's difficult from what we heard yesterday as well, because the changes in standards were a little bit bizarre, as I've heard one person say, all the way to the president's meandering speech, which represented the same kind of talk he gave at the UN, which was very confusing. So that's what the military folks who were very professional got out of this.
I guess, one parallel that I want to draw, because I want to make sure everyone listening and viewing this understands, there's something that Asha and I have talked a lot about in that in terms of the Justice Department and some of the norms and expectations we have that presidents don't get involved in charging decisions, don't get involved in interfering in the administration of justice, for example. There's also, although of course, civilian control of the military is an important concept and something that I think we treasure in our country, there have been important norms and values in terms of how the President of the United States, and to a lesser extent, the Secretary of Defense, interacts with the military. I really think it's important for everyone listening to this to understand your perspective on that, because it's something that people have a vague understanding of, but they don't really understand the way you do.
Yeah, well, the president is the commander-in-chief. The Secretary of Defense is his interlocutor with the various commands around the world, the combatant commands like European Command, Indo-Pacific Command, Southern Command, Northern Command, all of the four-star generals who are spread around the globe, and each of them have subordinate leaders. So orders should follow a chain of command from the president to the Secretary of Defense to a combatant commander, then to the subordinate commanders. But in this case, everybody was in the room. All the commanders from 1-star to 4-star were in the room. So there was a little bit of a violation of the authoritarian requirements that we normally have in the military of passing information from one level to another. The other thing that was challenging, and I'm sure you're going to get into this, some of the things that both Secretary of Defense Hegseth and the president said to take home with some of those leaders in the room were indicators of potential illegal action. And as commanders reporting to the Secretary of Defense, we are obligated through civil-military relations in a democratic society to obey the orders of the civilian leaders, whether we agree with them or not. But there's a caveat there, and that is it's the legal orders that come from those civilian leaders. And what we heard yesterday is some indicators that there may be some orders in the future, and there were some that were passed yesterday, and I can ripple through those real quickly, that had the potential for putting commanders in a position where they were asked to execute an illegal order. Like what you say? Well, Secretary Hegseth said, we're going to do away with these rules of engagement, and we're not going to pay as much attention to the Geneva Convention or the laws of land warfare. The president said, we're going to put military soldiers on the streets of the United States and even use some of the cities as training grounds. I'm not sure what that means. So that could be legal. It could be illegal, depending how the authorities are in place. But there were several other things that followed that. And even, even calling the Department of Defense the Department of War is something that should be approved by Congress. But it's just now Secretary Hegseth is calling that a secondary nomenclature for an organization in the U.S. government. Okay, he can do that. And is that legal or not? Those are the kind of questions that came out of this.
So I felt like there were three big buckets that Secretary Hegseth sort of addressed, and that sort of escalated in like levels of alarm that we should have. So the first bucket just seemed, he, as you mentioned, just railed against the physical fitness and appearance of the military, basically. I mean, and that seems like it seems like something that is squarely, I guess, in his authority to address. It doesn't sound like he needed to bring everybody, 800 people in from all over the world to do that, but this is about PT standards, and he called
height weight indicators,
fat generals and admirals, which I don't know if it's a great idea to insult, your leadership, but in any case, facial hair, all of these things. Okay, bucket one, right? That's what he cares about, and he wants people to look and a certain way and meet certain standards. Though even in that one, he did seem to suggest that I don't know if there are different physical fitness standards for women for combat roles, but it sounds like he's going to do away with that. I don't know if that is actually in his authority, because I know Congress has the authority to set rules and regulations for the military, but we can talk about that because it does seem like he's trying to make it harder for women to achieve certain positions or reverse some of that. The second bucket, which was more alarming, is this idea that certain structures that have been put in place to reduce things like sexual assault, harassment, all of those things, he wants to eliminate. Protections for whistleblowers, the ability to file anonymous reports. I mean, I know from having served on the Sexual Misconduct Committee at Yale for 6 years, I mean, where those kinds of structures were created within the university, how important they are to basically having reporting channels and having mechanisms to address it. He wants to do away with that. And also he mentioned that he wants to basically bring back hazing and that I guess officers can put their hands on recruits. And I don't know what all that means. So I want to address that with you. But that was kind of alarming because that signals a culture change and moving backwards in a lot of ways that I think the military has really tried to make progress on major problems. And then the third bucket, which was like DEFCON 1, was we no longer adhere to the laws of war, which, as you mentioned, I think creates a major issue just at the most fundamental level. Everyone in the military takes an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. That includes the laws of the United States. The laws of the United States includes all of our international agreements. So this is a big problem. And while it wasn't a loyalty oath directly, I would argue that it is a form of a loyalty oath because it is asking people, the officers, to essentially, as you said, either follow these legal orders, like choose between the Constitution and what they are going to be asked to do. That's what I heard. So those are the three buckets. And I don't, the first, we can just run through them. It seems like the first one is maybe not as important, but I just, that's, I think, a good maybe framework to kind of go through.
No, and it's a pretty good framework. And I'll start off by telling you, when I'm usually introduced on TV shows or wherever, they always say Lieutenant General, former commander of U.S. Army Europe. Well, that was my last job, and it was a great job. I loved it. Before I had that job, the one assignment I had before there happened to be the commander of IMT, which stood for Initial Military Training. So I was in charge of all the basic training sites and the advanced individual training sites. There were a total of 27 of those for new recruits, new civilians coming into the Army, new officers, and new warrant officers. So when you're talking about a force that takes in 160,000 people per year back then, when I was commanding it, this first issue of the physical fitness and the appearance standards is critically important. You set that from day one. And what we saw back then, Asha, truthfully, is the deterioration of America's society in terms of people can't do the kinds of things that they used to be able to do physically. So we actually had to do some testing and see how do we get people in shape to address the requirements of combat. I won't go deeply into that, but there's a whole lot of scientific studies that go along with that, and how there is, believe it or not, a difference between men and women in terms of their ability to do different things. Women can do a lot of things better than men, and men can do a lot of things better than women just because of physical structure. So you account for that in scores on physical training tests. The mantra now by many is, well, if the women who want to go in an infantry unit can't pass all the levels of physical training that the men can do, then they can't be an infantry woman. And that's just, to me, it's ludicrous. Now, my vet bros out there who are going to be listening to this or say that Hertling's a libtard and he's woke and all that, but I know what women can do. And in fact, I've talked to the women who are brand new to the infantry force. And in the last 5 years, about 150 women have gone through Ranger School, which is the toughest school that America has in terms of the military. So all of those things, can be debated. And what the secretary basically came out and did yesterday was just wipe that clean and said, nope, this is what I believe, so this is what we're going to do, with no accounting for science or research or what makes our Army great today. And I'm going to focus on Army, not the other services. I had a call last night to stay on the woman's issue from a young woman who happened to be one of our helicopter pilots when I was in combat. She's been a helicopter pilot for 16 years. And after watching the speech yesterday, she thought she would call me and say, what do you think? Am I going to lose my job? I've spent 5,000 hours in the air in combat situations flying a Black Hawk helicopter in combat arms. And I know I can't pass the same physical fitness test at the same standards that men can with pull-ups and a 2-mile run because of upper body strength and oxygen capacity. I'm getting too far into the weeds and I apologize for that. So there's even a lot more that is at stake in that first bucket you talked about. The second bucket that you talked about, Asha, was the harassment and hazing of soldiers in training units. And yeah, that's wrong. I mean, we've put items in place, and the things that the secretary we're describing were the way it used to be about 30 years ago in basic training. And basic training has been transformed, and in my view, a very positive way, that drill sergeants, not officers, but drill sergeants don't touch or push or shove or knock down or beat up soldiers when they're going through basic training. And that's what he was talking about yesterday. And I would compare that to the quality of our force, which is pretty good because we treat people with respect and we bring them in as members of the team and we develop their leadership qualities even when they're a young private, compared to what I saw in my last job in the Army when I went to Russia and went to some of their basic training sites and watched their officers beat their recruits with sticks. In fact, in some cases, kill young soldiers who were enlistees. That's how serious it was, and had no respect at all for their force. And we're seeing the effects of that on the battlefield of Ukraine today, where there are soldiers not following NCO orders, not following officers' orders, and Russia's army sucks, okay? And it's all made by what happens between the individual soldier and their sergeant and the sergeant and the officer.
I mean, it seems to me, I didn't mean to interrupt you, General.
No, I want to get to the third one because that is important. The don't worry about rules of engagement, don't worry about Geneva Convention. That's kind of the things I heard as an upper level leader in the military from most brand new second lieutenants. Untie my hands so I can do anything that I want to do. Well, unfortunately, there are laws of war. And when you violate some of those, it's not only a reflection on your country, violating a moral certitude, it's also going to have effects on you in terms of moral decay. When you send young people to war at 18 years old, they see a lot of things that human beings should not see. And they do a lot of things that human beings should not see. So you're actually protecting them by setting a group of standards for obeying the laws of land warfare and the Geneva Convention so they don't have that. And then I'll add one more thing to that. It's a war crime. It is criminal. It's illegal, and it violates our oath to uphold, as Asha said, the Constitution of the United States. And as the president, according to the Supreme Court, is immune from any criminal activities, unfortunately, his Secretary of Defense and all the soldiers under his charge are not.
So a couple of things really jump out to me, General, that you said. I mean, one is, of course, talking about how in many ways this is going to make our military less effective because, just like we've seen in so many other parts of our government where we have a brain drain of people leaving everything from the EPA to the CFPB to the SEC, all these people who have decades of experience in government leaving. Here we have potentially, let's say, a very qualified, capable helicopter pilot leaving the military because she feels that she has no place there anymore, potentially, seeing a writing on the wall. But also, of course, you talk about the term, moral decay. I think, it leads to a lot of what's on people's minds. I'll say this as somebody who, lives near Chicago and has considered that a home base. There's a lot of afraid, people in this area seeing armed, personnel on the streets of the city, ironically searching for crime in some of the fanciest, nicest areas of the city of Chicago. How do you think soldiers and generals, leaders from, but not just leaders, the average soldiers, how are they going to react to what they're hearing when you see the President of the United States and the Secretary of Defense? Do members of the public have a right to be concerned, or should they be concerned about what the military can ultimately, the impact of the military could be on them and this change in the military?
Absolutely. And again, I'm going to go back to an example. When Secretary Hegseth was still a Fox News reporter, he was a great defender of a couple of war criminals who had killed the enemy and civilians in combat. And because he was supported by President Trump during the first term, I think 3 of them were let off either charges or pardoned. And that, the after effects was not reported in the media, but that caused some real cheetah flips inside the organization of the Navy SEALs and the U.S. Army. And what I'd suggest is those generals, admirals, and senior enlisted advisors after that meeting yesterday probably went outside the theater, took their notebook that they had taken notes in, and their first thought was, how the hell are we going to explain this to the soldiers? What are we going to tell the gay soldiers in the rank, or the transgender soldiers, or the women who have been serving in combat roles? What are we going to tell them other than you got to shape up and you got to meet fitness standards? What are we going to tell the large percentage of Black soldiers who have, and I can't pronounce the name of the malady, but it's the facial issue with shaving bumps, that if they shave, their faces break out and there's bumps all over. That's why they have beards. So the beardos are people who have physical profiles to grow their hair, their facial hair long, so it doesn't create this kind of malady. What are we going to tell them? Either shave or get out of the Army? It's going to cause those kinds of dynamics within the chain of command. And all this is happening, Renata, in a period of time when our national security environment and the threats today are greater than I had ever seen in my 40 years in uniform. So it becomes, I don't want to counter the Secretary of Defense because he has an awful lot of power. But boy, oh boy, is it a distraction for not only the senior leaders, but also for the soldiers serving. And by the way, the last thing I'll point out, all of these young men and women who join the military forces do it to be part of something bigger than themselves. They do it to serve others. They don't get paid real well. I mean, this isn't, they don't join to get the pay because it's not very big. And the 4-star generals don't stay in because of the pay. They could quickly get out and get jobs for double or triple the amount that they're being paid as generals. Trust me on that one. So what is going to happen to that retention? Well, we've seen indicators of it in California when National Guard troops were put into Los Angeles. There's already indicators in those Guard soldiers going in there and indicators from the ones that were sent into the DC area, picking up trash and putting out stuff that goes under bushes, the mulch. That's not what they signed up to do. So in Los Angeles, we're already seeing those National Guard units declining in terms of their re-enlistment rates. I didn't sign up for this. I'm not gonna continue to do this, even though it pays me a couple of extra dollars a month so I can get by. I don't want to be a part of this anymore. And I think my take, and I have no proof to this, that it's going to continue to affect re-enlistments and retention in the military.
So I wanted to address a couple of points that you made. First, I love that you pointed out that Russia's military sucks. Just to highlight the fact that not too long ago, Ted Cruz tweeted a military recruitment video of Russia's military, touting it as some kind of great example that we should be aspiring to. And it was a very, I would call it kind of toxic masculine recruitment video. I mean, they were all white, all had shaved heads. There were no women. I mean, obviously this is Russia, so I don't know like how, racially diverse it is, but it wasn't. And he was suggesting that our military was weak in comparison. I'm just glad that you pointed that out because that has always been. And it made me so mad at the time. And by the way, I also just want to say that I don't think that Ted Cruz could probably do a single push-up. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, I was going to just say, I think we had a shorter version of this conversation when that happened. And I remember saying, it's interesting that Ted Cruz is going to insult, those in the military when he's never been in the military. How does he know? And what I'll tell you is, after 40 years, I'll tell you, when I first joined the military, it was rough. We were coming out of Vietnam, and there was a magnificent transformation due to some senior leaders, the kind of guys that were in the room, guys and gals that were in the room yesterday. No, it would have been all guys at the time because the WAC Corps in the Army was still in existence until 1974, the Women's Army Corps. It was separate and not even close to being equal. That was part of the transformation of the military after Vietnam. And over the last 20, 30, 40 years, that military has grown in capabilities. They have adjusted to the time. They have fought some wars that were very difficult to fight. And that's another mantra that the vet bros will use. Well, what war have you won recently? You lost in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I would debate anybody that says either one of those was a loss for the military. But they seem to also forget Desert Storm in 4 days, or the operation in Panama, or some of the other strikes around the world that we were asked to do at short notice, or all the things that remain unseen that the military does. So I'm sure Senator Cruz has his own opinion on some of these things, but he probably shouldn't voice that opinion on things he knows very little about.
I just wanted to point out also on the pardoning of war criminals that Trump did. One of the things about the military, and you and I have had this conversation, General, that there is such a strong code of conduct that soldiers are socialized into, and when you turn that upside down, I mean, it is a very autocratic move to glorify the violation of a code so that, you're kind of sending the signal that the only code here is the loyalty to the leader. So I think that there was a reason behind that. And it gets to this idea of sending troops into the streets, right? To get to our original question, which is, how can we condition this force to be willing to see American cities as a battlefield and Americans as the kinds of enemies that they would see in a foreign theater, that they might be willing to take action at? I mean, and I think that is really the long-term psychological project that is afoot right now.
Yeah, I think it is too. Yeah, I think that making it normal is what many are trying to do. And that's why, if we can take anything positive out of the session yesterday, it was the discipline and restraint of the individuals in the room. It was a collective reminder in this day and age that we have this professional culture of the military, of these individuals who have been trained in the most important thing is your oath to an idea, the Constitution, versus an oath to a person, the president. And that transcends politics. The professionalism and discipline of all the people in that organization. And I'm sure that there were some of those people were Trump supporters. There's no doubt in my mind. But they realized that part of their professional requirement was to maintain their discipline and their professionalism as they were a member of that audience. So if your question is, will that oath be overcome? Will leaders who are asked to do illegal things do them? I don't think so. Now, there will be individual actions like we saw in Los Angeles with the one Marine that zip-tied somebody and then quickly untied them. Yeah, those kind of things are going to happen because people get caught up in the action. But when you're talking about commanders saying, no, we will not commit an illegal act, that's not who we are as a military. We defend the people of our country. We defend the Constitution. We don't go against them unless you decide to call something like the Insurrection Act and you demand that we attack our fellow citizens because you have called an act. That's the one troublesome moment that I see on our horizon. And I think we're building up to the potential for that.
Well, it's clearly what Trump is trying to do. And it's interesting to hear you kind of describe what you saw there, because that was, I think, my real question and what I've been trying to puzzle through. There's a lot of television commentators saying, well, look, Trump is trying to treat this like a political rally, and the soldiers weren't laughing along, or the soldiers, the generals, admirals, et cetera, were not laughing along. They kind of weren't reacting. They seemed uncomfortable to me. That was my read of somebody who's not in the military. I guess what I want to understand is, I mean, you've talked a little bit about trying to figure out how to digest this and bring it to people who are under their command. But I think how can somebody who is being told by the president of the United States that there are enemies in our cities and that it's ordinary to use and appropriate to use force and use military force in our cities, how would you characterize the reaction that you saw, and how do you see that playing out?
Well, the first thing I saw, and I had the same experience, I was putting myself in the seat, to be honest with you. I wasn't watching. I was trying to think about what it would be like had I been there. And the first reaction was just staggering, that how every principle of leadership was being violated by Secretary Hegseth as he was trying to establish standards. We don't do it that way. I mean, that's not the common approach to leading, especially individuals who, if you think about it, in that room of 800 people, each one of those people in those seats have anywhere from 25 to 40 years of service, each of them. So you calculate that there was probably a couple of millennial worth of experience in that room. And you're being lectured by a guy who just wants to change the standard. So the first emotion I had was, this is staggeringly stupid. This is dumb. And it's inappropriate and just contrary to what we believe. The second thought I already expressed to you of taking notes. Some of these things just don't fit with logic and reason. They just don't make sense. And it's not something that I know anything about. And yet I'm now going to be responsible for telling if I were back in Europe, my 60,000 soldiers on the landmass of Europe, what I just heard in this conference, and getting them through it. The third thing is, what is it going to do to our alliances? How did our allies take these two presentations, and how did our enemies see them? What was the reaction in Russia, China, North Korea, Iran as they watched this happen? I got a couple of text messages from European colleagues, people who were my counterpart in different European governments last night, who watched it, and they were aghast and said, "We don't understand what's going on. You guys are the best trained army in the world. Why is this happening right now?" And I found it hard to explain to them, and I didn't. I just said, it's something we're going through right now. That's the best I could give. But that isn't going to fit in with the soldiers who see themselves as being used. And I'm sorry, that's a long way around what I'm going to say, Renato, and that is, the military, there's this Clausewitzian principle that he calls something the triangle. And it's an even, a three-sided triangle where there's trust between the military and the government and the people, and the people and the military. And if you lose that trust, if you're doing things like the Russian military has with their government and their people, then you're going to lose wars badly. And a lot of people are going to get killed. And if you take your eye off the ball as a government because you've lost trust and you're trying to impress people and be the hardcore guy that, some people try and be, you're going to lose trust with at least a lot of the people, and you don't come together as institutions. So those are, it all boils down to trust, and we can't lose that. And yet I would tell you, I saw a poll last night that said America still trusts, 62% of Americans still trust the military. I'm wondering how that's going to change over the next couple of weeks.
Well, I think part of the high trust of the military is that it's hard to find someone who is not touched by the military in some way, who doesn't have someone in their family who is a part of the military or is connected. So the part of that trust comes from the fact that the military is so diverse, it crosses racial cleavages, crosses socioeconomic cleavages, exactly, that, it draws from like every cross section of our population in a way that generates this trust. When you homogenize it, then you essentially create something that people feel is separate from them and who they are, and also their values. And that, I think, is where, and I think that's what they're trying to do in changing some of these standards in unattainable ways. And when you talked about the facial hair, that's a condition that disproportionately affects Black men, from what I understand. So there is a racial disparity in how that is going to impact the forces. I guess like the only silver lining, and maybe, we can wrap on this thought, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, is that as with most things with this administration, its priority on creating public spectacle can actually thwart its own nefarious goals. And we see this all the time. Renato and I talk about it when it comes to, charges. The fact that, Trump is tweeting and talking about things that really gives, the defense much more ammunition. Even with the universities, the fact that they are making so clear that this is retaliatory, et cetera. So in many ways, it seemed to me that this speech might have actually coup-proofed the military just by the fact that they broadcast it everywhere. And there is, as a result, almost this increased spotlight and responsibility that is placed on these leaders on how they are going to respond. You can imagine that this could have happened in a much more secretive way that, behind the scenes that we would not have known that certain guardrails were being dismantled, that certain protections and cultural, progress things have disappeared. They just came out and said it.
Yeah. I agree with you completely that this was a watershed moment. And the reason I think that is because we have seen organizations, legal firms, universities, media bend to the will. President Trump thrives on applause and cheering and interactions with people and bending them to what he wants them to do. What he received on Tuesday was quiet professionalism. And I think that will rattle him a little bit. And I think it was an example that there's not going to be applause from this audience because they swore an oath. They're in their position because they swore an oath to the Constitution. And unlike some senators and congressmen who also swore an oath, they're actually going to live by it and protect those ideas which make our democracy strong. There may be a little bit of bending in some elements of the military, but it's not going to break. It is not going to break. So I think you're right, Asha, that is something positive. Again, going back to what I said earlier, something positive that came from yesterday. And I hope it proves to be true.
Well, thank you, General. This has been really important conversation. Yeah, it's complicated, but important. Because I think we're starting to see stuff starting to get real here, where you have a president with a very authoritarian lean that does not respect the Constitution, trying to change the character of the military, trying to destroy the norms and values that we've had for centuries at this point. So it's definitely cause for concern and something that I'm glad that you're bringing attention to. So thank you.
Well, thank you both. So thanks for having me. Appreciate it. You guys are doing great things. Thank you. Keep up the fire.
So, Asha, I have to say, I would have never guessed at the beginning of this week that this story that we're about to talk about would not be our lead story for the week.
I was about to say the exact same thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're literally talking about the indictment of the FBI director and of what on its face appears to be a very questionable indictment. That's how I would phrase it. And, it's a moment that harkens so much back to everything that we have talked about regarding this president during his first term. So there's a lot here. Obviously, we talked about this a little bit last time, but now we have the indictment in front of us. And we also have, of course, the original indictment containing the count that the jury did not approve and did not vote for, the grand jury.
And I have to say that even though we, last week, one of the things that we did when we were talking about this was trying to guess as to what exactly the criminal act was that could be charged, because at that point, it was clear that this was in the works. And I have to say that now that we have the actual indictment, that question is not actually resolved.
Well, this is what's so interesting about this. So I will tell you, Asha, the first thing you do when you're looking at whether you're prosecuting a case or you're defending a case in a criminal matter, you're looking at it and you're like, okay, what is the conduct? Like, what is it that is being charged? And in a false statement case, which this is, okay, at least the first count, and it's really basically two counts effectively, all focus on a statement, although we'll get to this issue with the second count. But a false statement case, you look at what is the statement, and on its face, there's a problem. There's multiple problems with the indictment when we're looking at count one of this indictment, because it says in count one, paragraph 1, that James Comey falsely stated to a U.S. senator on September 30th that, quote, he had not, quote, authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source in news reports, unquote. One problem, a threshold problem, is James Comey never moved his lips and said those words on September 3rd, 2020. What they're really doing is they're taking Ted Cruz's words that he affirmed, and they're putting him there. And so I don't even think that statement as written is technically accurate.
Right.
Now,
because if you read the words, it accuses him literally of falsely stating, and then it has those words in quotes. So that is the accusation, that he actually uttered those precise words himself.
Right. Now, maybe there's some case law out there. I don't know. I've not researched this issue because candidly, I've never seen a false statement case that charges things that the person didn't actually say. Okay.
And it's on video.
No, I've watched the video a bunch of times. I got to tell you, I'm preparing for this conversation. I watched that exchange between him and Ted Cruz a bunch of times. And I was trying to figure out, how am I going to explain this to people? Because Ted Cruz is referring to something that Comey said in a prior testimony in response to a question from Senator Grassley in like 2017. And so Cruz he trips up his words, asks about something that Comey said back in 2017. And Comey's like, well, I stand by my testimony. And none of that complexity is in this count at all. And so I think that as a threshold matter, this is one of the rare indictments, and I can explain why it's rare, where I think there's a chance it just gets tossed out on the paper. In other words, we don't even have to have a trial. Just in the four corners of this thing, it doesn't even stand up.
So just so that we can harken back to one of our earlier episodes, in terms of specifying the conduct that was actually, that you're accusing the person of. I mean, I guess there's the quotation there, but we talked about this a little bit when Trump was indicted by the Manhattan District Attorney.
Right.
Remember, we talked about how that indictment was very thin, though that seems to be the practice in, I guess, the New York courts or whatever. But remember, we were talking about a bill of particulars where the defense asks the prosecution to provide more information on exactly the conduct that they are accusing of being criminal. And I'm not sure whether that is a road that would even need to be. I mean, it sounds like from what you're saying, this, as you said, could be just tossed from the get-go. But if it's not, is that the next step?
Well, it's like a tale of two counts here. So it's really interesting. Really interesting that you brought this up, Josh. I will note, I was so fair-minded back then. If you recall, Trump was the one being indicted. I'm not.
Yeah, you're like, this is so unfair to him.
I actually, yeah, and I've said I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. I think that's fair to say, and it's well established. But I'm like, look, it's BS to have an indictment where you don't even know what the hell is going on. Like, you need to specify what the conduct is in the indictment. It's just how our system's supposed to work. Yeah,
because how else is someone going to actually mount a defense? Like, what are they defending against?
Exactly. So that is my issue with count 2 of this indictment, which we haven't even gotten to yet. So if you look at count 2, it basically says that Comey corruptly endeavored to influence, obstruct, and impede this congressional hearing by, quote, making false and misleading statements before that committee. What statements? Which ones? What are you talking about? Like, in other words, what is you're supposed to, if you're the defense here, look through the entire transcript and try to guess what the false statements are. So unless they're just referring to the singular one in count 1, and the government is willing to just limit it to that, I think they're in trouble on that one. They're going to have to do a bill of particulars. As to count 1, I think it's worse, because with count 1, I just don't even think, like, the problem is a lack of specificity. I think, like, it's not even accurate. So it's like, if I'm like, well, you said this on your loan application for your mortgage fraud, since we've talked about that recently, and you didn't actually say that in the application, like, that's kind of a problem for the government in that count.
And we haven't even gotten to the other count that the grand jury didn't return a true bill.
And you can see why, the other count, because when you look at it, what it alleges, I'm looking at that failed count here. He quote, falsely stating to a U.S. senator during a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing that he, James Comey, did not remember being taught of person one's approval of a plan concerning person 2 in the 2016 presidential election. good luck proving beyond a reasonable doubt what someone remembers. Like, I mean, that I've never seen that before in my life. Someone try to charge that as the false statement. And of course, the grand jury, which is like you can indict anything. And there's no defense there, but the grand jurors themselves looked at that one and they're like, that doesn't make any sense to us.
Yeah. So they tossed that one. And by the way, this is all conduct that at least the one that they did get the indictment return on, that occurred on September 30th, 2020. We are recording this on October 1st, 2025, which means the statute of limitations has passed. So if this gets tossed, like in other words, there's no ability to correct anything here and refile charges.
It's a very interesting, as I'm saying, this is a very interesting situation, Asha. I mean, per bill of particulars, okay, you can specify for count 2, perhaps. I don't know, because it's so vague, they can specify it. For count 1, I think they may be in trouble. Unless this somehow, there's some case law that this is, that this can be saved, which on its face, it seems very questionable to me. They can't indict some different statement from that same testimony later. They can't fix this count because it is what it is, and the statute of limitations is over. So I think my former boss, Pat Fitzgerald, who's defending James Comey, is got a lot to work with here. I mean, this is a sort of case where I would ordinarily consider a speedy trial, which you usually don't consider, but I might consider it here because they clearly don't have their crap together at the U.S. Attorney's Office over there. But boy, there's a lot of briefing that you'd want to do before you even got to trial on this one.
Well, there's yet another problem here, Renato.
Oh my God. There's more?
Yeah, which you didn't even catch. So this indictment was signed by and only by Lindsay Halligan.
True.
Who is the person that Trump put in place after Eric Siebert resigned because he was unwilling to bring charges against Comey. He did not feel that there was sufficient evidence. Eric Siebert, as I understand it, is an interim U.S. attorney who was put in place, appointed by the judges of the district under a statute, the Vacancies Act, and I think there's all these like procedural things. But there is this question that once he resigned, that a replacement could only be appointed by the judges under the Vacancies Act. That, in other words, that Trump putting her there is not a valid, even like a valid interim appointment. And if that's the case, then it seems that she would not have the authority to go in and present this.
Yeah, I do think that they have a good argument there. It's candidly, that alone is a better argument than most criminal defendants have in federal cases. And I think, obviously, just to be clear, obviously another alternative would have been for Trump to appoint Ms. Halligan and to have the Senate confirm her as the Constitution contemplates, right? That the president nominates people and then there's an advice and consent to the Senate. What this is really about, of course, is violating the separation of powers and undermining our constitutional framework. What I will note, though, is that I think that this Supreme Court may invalidate that portion of the statute that allows the judges to make those interim appointments. But I don't know if that saves Ms. Halligan because she hasn't been confirmed by the Senate.
Well, for the Supreme Court to invalidate that part of the statute could get awkward, Renato, because it turns out that there is an Office of Legal Counsel memo from sometime in the 80s that addresses this very issue and basically says that when an interim U.S. attorney is appointed and leaves, that the replacement has to come from that same process by the judges in that district. That memo was written by Would you care to guess who it was written by?
I know the answer. I've looked it up, so I can't. I know it. I knew this in the back of my head. Now that you're reminding me of it, but it's Sam Alito, right?
It is Sam Alito.
Yeah, who happens to be an associate justice of the United States Supreme Court, who would ordinarily be someone you might expect to vote for the Trump administration, although he doesn't like criminals very much, criminal defendants. He's not a big fan of them, I'm told. But yes, in this circumstance,
Yeah. So my point is that it would be hard for Tweedledum and Tweedledee, who always, want to go along with the Trump administration, to maybe do that, given that there is this history. Now, of course, they clearly have no compunction against going against previous positions that they've had and being inconsistent. But there is some irony that on this exact point, Alito would, like, there is actually black and white opinion from a long time ago that would side with the argument that benefits James Comey here.
Yeah. So in an ordinary criminal case, and when I say ordinary criminal case, what I mean is a criminal case in which there's a substantial concern or question about the guilt of the defendant because there's a lot of really questionable evidence out there. It's evidence that could be seen either way. And the prosecution generally has an advantage at trial, this and that. I think in a typical case, you might spend years litigating a lot of these issues. Okay. Because you're in no hurry to get to the end of the line here and go to a trial. And in a typical case, typical defendant, United States versus John Doe, I could see a lot of motions and briefing on all of these subjects and trying to get an interlocutory appeal on this question that you just mentioned. In this case, though, the indictment is the punishment against James Comey. The indictment is the first indictment ever an FBI director. And it's about Trump sending a narrative that all of the criminal investigations of him were false and Comey's evil. And it's to pressure Comey and to paint him as a non-law abider, a criminal, and to make him suffer. And so I do wonder whether the right path for James Comey here is going to be to rush this to trial, to rush the briefing, rush the trial, assert his speedy trial rights, because he could clear his name rather quickly here. And that would be in his best interest. And of course, would also make for a dramatic, you can imagine some movie in 10 years titled 70 Days or whatever it is, in the time from his indictment to his trial of how that all plays out.
Though it does seem like the initial defect that you pointed out on the face of the indictment, that it's just demonstrably false. I mean, that's something that they don't have to litigate for years and years. I mean, that's just something that they would raise for the judge and the judge could throw out and it would be reviewed, I believe, for clear error. I mean, that doesn't seem like something that would realistically be reversed on any kind of appeal.
If I would say that's right, unless there's some case law that I'm not aware of on false statements, that just seems really problematic. So, but ordinarily, the way the way this would work, right, is that an indictment would come out, there'd be all sorts of discovery produced. Maybe there's not a lot here, but ordinarily that would happen. You'd have some lengthy date to file motions. You'd file a motion, then they'd file a response and a reply, and then maybe the judge would grant the bill of particulars, and you'd have that, and you go back.
You just skip all of that, and you just go straight to.
I would say let's do the briefing really fast. I'm ready now. We're going to brief it next week. We're ready to motion. We want 1 week motions, 1 week on responses, 1 week replies. We're getting ready for trial.
The defense goes up and plays the video from the the testimony is like, so my client didn't say that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to deny the motion, then we're going to trial. And I mean, so I just think it's a very interesting. I mean, I would do the motion you suggested too. Whether Miss Halligan, in fact, had the authority, and win or lose, you got those issues, but you might want to rush it to trial because for James Comey, a person who is understandably concerned about his reputation and his standing and what this means for him and his family, just being in this position is punishment enough.
For sure. So, Renato, before we go, I have really good news for you.
What?
So Chunk, who you mentioned last week as the fat bear that you thought was the top fat bear in Alaska's fat bear competition won.
That's great. It's not as good as the White Sox winning. Okay, I would like them to win, but I will take it. All my teams suck, so I finally have a winner. The Bears are bad, the White Sox are bad, the Bulls are bad, but we've got Chunk. We've got
Chunk. And it seems like it's a long time coming because Chunk has appeared in the competition every year since its inception. But this is his first title.
Yes. In fact, there was a 2-time champion. I was picking the underdog by picking Chunk. There's a 2-time champion that Chunk defeated this year. So this is a big victory. So, I mean, are we going to see Chunk next year?
I don't know. I hope so. He's got a broken jaw, apparently, which is really sad.
He's eating a lot of salmon, so that's understandable.
Yeah, okay. I don't know. That kind of makes me sad. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe we'll see him. We'll see him next year when we go on our cruise.
Absolutely. So if you're interested in seeing Chunk with us, visit visit either of our sites. The links below. And you can get information and join us on our cruise where we're gonna not only bet on the fat bears, but we're going to do everything from karaoke to chatting about events. And maybe, Asha, I'm gonna carry some of this good luck into my fantasy football team and some of my other stuff.
And now, I mean, I'm kind of looking at Chunk and I'm realizing, so Pancake goes to the vet on Friday. He's kind of fat. He's sitting right there, so I'm trying not to talk too loud. But I'm worried that I'm going to be in trouble.
Little salmon for Pancake.
What's that?
Little salmon for Pancake as well.
I know. I don't feed him that much. I think he's not getting enough exercise.
Wow.
So
well, he's a house cat.
If any listeners have ideas for, I try to play with him and stuff, like I do feather toy and things, but I don't know if there's like an exercise wheel or kitty treadmill or something that I can get him.
Please let us know in the comments. Save Pancake. Save Pancake, save the world.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.